Or put it another way. If you have faith in we arose from random chaos to goo through the zoo to you, well, in the end, we're nothing more than animals, are we? So why not behave like an animal? Why be restrained by morality or authority or religion? You see, my point is, tonight, what we believe in affects our behavior, how we live. It all comes down to a very personal issue at a very personal level. In other words, ideas have consequences. What we put our trust in affects us deeply and affects what we do. Because in the end, everybody, whether we thought it through or whether we've never given it a thought, we all live by certain maxims, don't we? By certain overarching principles that give meaning to our other activities. Now, often people go through life having not really thought these things out. But nonetheless, it is true. We all have overarching beliefs, and that gives us moral criteria by which we judge what we do. Now, you can see that if you have a look at these pieces of paper on the tables. Jesus tells this story, and it really illustrates it well. It's a story he told about a farmer, and it comes from Luke's Gospel, Luke's account of Jesus, and it's sometimes called the parable of the rich fool, because that was God's verdict on the man. So here's the story. He told them a parable, saying, "The land of a rich man produced plentifully. He thought to himself, 'What shall I do? For I have nowhere to store my crops.' And he said, 'I'll do this. I will tear down my barns and build larger ones. And there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, Soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax. Eat, drink, be merry.' But God said to him, 'Fool, this night your soul's required of you, and the things you've prepared, whose will they be?' And Jesus said, 'So it is the one who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich towards God.'" So, here's a farmer. Got a bumper crop. We might say the businessman the entrepreneur who floats his company for a fortune, or the broker who lands an unbelievable bonus, or the lucky punter who wins the lottery rollover jackpot, or just the person who gets a great early retirement package, enabling them to buy their dream cottage in the wooded river valley by the sea. I will say to my soul, "Soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, and be merry." We'd all like that, wouldn't we? But the day the check clears, there's a searing pain across his chest. And by the time the air ambulance is hovering, it's too late. And whatever else the obituaries say in tribute, God's verdict is, "You fool." Can you imagine that? Someone who was self-evidently a success, but God's verdict is, "You fool." And it's not that his actions were dumb or corrupt or immoral. It's simply that he had built his life on a mistaken premise, on a set of beliefs that turned out to be wrong. He'd lived in line with what he believed, but his beliefs turned out to be the wrong ones. And his mistake only comes to light when it's too late. Suddenly he finds he's got lots of what he doesn't need and none of what he does. He has piles of riches stored up on earth, no use. And the one thing he does need, a rich relationship with God, is the one thing he hasn't got. Why? Because he's been mistaken in his beliefs. He's mistaken his body for his soul. He's ignored or simply avoided that spiritual direction. He walked past the end of the aisle and ignored it. It was only about his bank balance and his appetites. He'd mistaken time for eternity. He'd gambled the possibility of immortality for a foreseeable future. But that night, he stepped into eternity. And, have a look at the sheets. He'd mistaken himself for God. He'd tried to play God himself. Do you see all those aggressive pronouns? What shall I do? for I have nowhere to store my crops. And he said, I will do this. I will tear down my barns, build larger ones, and there I will store all my grain and my goods. It's all about him, isn't it? He sees himself as captain of his fate, master of his destiny. He's treated God as if he were irrelevant. God never even came into the equation. Treated God as superfluous. And yet when God says, this night your soul is required of you, well, that word required really means asked for back. Talk about my life, my barns, but they're not really yours. They're only on loan. So he'd mistaken his body for his soul, his time for eternity, himself for God, and he'd only acted in line with his beliefs, mistaken though they were. Now, try and wrap this up. Do you see then how what we believe about God really matters? It cannot be irrelevant. It matters on an individual level and very personally. It doesn't have to change the ultimate context in which I behave. It changes the immediate context of my behavior. So, if I believe there is a God who is going to hold me accountable for my actions, well, then there is an important sense about that I have to bring that to bear all the time. The person who believes in God doesn't have God somewhere at the back of their mind, or at least they shouldn't. Now, if we believe in God, then he should always be at the forefront of our decisions and our behavior. So my faithfulness to my wife, or my activities as a father, or my encouragement and care of my children, or my honesty at work, or the way in which I carry out my business, or the way I speak to my neighbour, or the way I speak to them about them to others. All of those things are going to be affected by the God I believe in. And it's totally personal, isn't it? Not just a topic for when conversation is flagging. It's not just a philosophical idea. What I believe affects what I do, and therefore it cannot be irrelevant. It affects the everyday relationships I have, and the necessity, it must affect them deeply. So, is faith relevant? Well, if God exists, yes, it is. It cannot but matter. Because what we believe or don't believe about God makes all the difference for me and for those around me, personally, individually, intimately. So the challenge is, am I right in what I believe? Or am I mistaken? Now, if you're not a Christian here this evening, can I encourage you to take a bet? You don't often hear a vicar say that, do you? Pascal had a wager. He said, this is what he proposed. He said, why not live for a time as though there is a God? Take that bet, take that wager. And you can do that because your reason is no more offended by believing than disbelieving. After all, there's evidence you can offer both for and against. So reason's not offended by choosing one or the other. So why not try living as though there is a God? Why not pray and see what happens? Why not read a gospel, one of the 4 accounts of Jesus' life in the Bible? If you come with a friend tonight, why not do that with them? Get on the blower tomorrow and say, let's meet up and read that a gospel together, and I want to talk to you about it. In other words, approach God as if he does exist. And have the integrity with yourself, with your needs, with your desires, with your longings, and approach God that way. Because you see, there is a promise in the Bible. Jesus said, seek and you will find, knock and the door will be open to you. Or the prophet Jeremiah said, God says, you seek me and you will find me when you seek me with all your heart. So don't let God's verdict on you be, you fool, for want of checking out the beliefs you hold. Is faith relevant? Yeah, we all believe something, and it affects our behavior. So it cannot but be relevant. The question is, what do you believe? Does it stack up? And if it doesn't, what are you going to do about it? Well, that's me done. Why not take just a couple of moments around the tables to comment to each other and then see if there's some questions you want to ask.